Time for the market report weather, the talk this week.
Whether it's weather or whether it's commodities, we're covering both. But first, the numbers. What were the week's biggest gains and losses? And then the Mississippi State climatologist talks about the current drought we're facing and more. So, markets closed, still on the upswing, and both row crops and livestock split. Let's take a look. The week's biggest gain, soybean oil, up over 3¼ cents, nearly a 5% increase from the previous week. The week's biggest loss, live cattle, down about 2½ cents, a 1% decrease from the previous week. So if you're here in Mississippi, you've probably noticed it's been pretty dry these last 6 or so months. That's because we're currently in a drought. State climatologist Mike Brown recently spoke on the Crop Situation podcast to get us up to speed on the situation, what's causing it, and what we can expect this year.
We are actually coming out of a La Nina and into a neutral pattern. And because of that, the jet stream isn't acting quite like it normally acts because we're seeing those cooler temperatures in the Pacific beginning to warm. And as you do that, you're shifting high and low pressure areas around. And what that has meant for us this spring is the jet stream has stayed a little bit further west than normal for this time of year, meaning Texas, Oklahoma, parts of Missouri, and then the upper Midwest have seen the rains that are more typical for the southeastern United States. It tends to happen as we transition out of La Ninas into a neutral pattern. So it hasn't caught me off guard so much. However, when we have these drier periods, we typically still get good cold fronts that move through. And we've seen several of those this year. One day on a Saturday, it's 84 degrees, and on the next day, our high temperatures in the mid-60s. And we've seen a few of those already this spring. The problem is we're not getting any moisture with those things. They're coming through way too fast. We're not developing a deep layer of moisture in Mississippi to provide us good precipitation. And so we're a little bit unusual in this transition period in that we're not just missing the typical amount of precipitation, we're missing all the precipitation. And it's really showing up with devastating effects across our state. Climatologically speaking, here in Mississippi, our drought, our seasonal drought normally occurs kind of mid to late August through September and into early to mid-October. That's typically when we see our droughts. And we know that they're coming. We just see this decrease in precipitation, and it doesn't really catch anybody off guard. Last year, we stayed wet over here in the eastern part of the state through early June. But then it's like the spigot just turned off, and we went from feasting into famine very, very quickly with respect to precipitation. And so while we had good soil moisture across the state for the majority of July, we saw some drying occurring earlier in August than we normally do, and that lasted really through the end of October this year. So it was kind of an extended period of our seasonal drought. And so we entered the winter quite dry in Mississippi. Winter across the state, I would categorize it as fairly normal to just below normal amounts of precipitation. February this year was our driest February ever on record for the state of Mississippi. And then after February, of course, we get into March. That was the third warmest month we've ever had on record and the 11th driest combined. And so evaporation is kicking in, and when we're deepening that drought, we're lowering that moisture level in the soil deeper and deeper and deeper. So last summer was pretty dry, followed by a somewhat normal winter, but we didn't replenish our soil moisture. We just had our normal amount. And now having the driest February coupled with, mid 80 temperatures for a few weeks now, we're really drying out that top layer of soil dramatically. 1916, 1941, 1943, and 1970 were 4 years that look very similar to 2026 in terms of the rainfall amounts and when they occurred. And unfortunately, expanding all of those years out to the end of the year, all of those years finished the year 30 to 55% below normal precipitation. So drought kind of begot drought, right? I mean, if we don't have moisture in the soil, if we don't have evaporation, if we don't have transpiration, it's harder to get low-level moisture in the atmosphere that can then be used for precipitation. One thing we have seen and that we benefit, believe it or not, we did a study here at Mississippi State, and one of the things that we see is since the advent, or I guess broader usage of irrigation in the Delta, we have actually seen more rainfall on the northeastern part of the state because that moisture is advecting over or moving over the state and then producing the clouds and the precipitation for the northeast part of the state. So it's kind of beneficial in two ways, right? You're irrigating the Delta crops. You're also secondarily irrigating some of the crops in northeast Mississippi as well through the movement of that atmosphere that has that higher moisture content.
And that's it for a deeper look into the markets.